The Indian Cavalry Tank Museum, the only one of its kind in Asia, is located at Ahmednagar near Pune. Ahmednagar has seen many dynasties like the Bahmani and many renowned rulers like the Nizam and Queen Chand Bibi. The Emperor Aurangzeb died near Ahmednagar. The cantonment at Ahmednagar is nearly 200 years old. It accommodates the Armoured Corps Centre and School. Here, fresh young boys from school and college are trained to be professional tankmen. And it is here that those who have served the Corps for a lifetime hang up their spurs. Appropriately, armoured fighting vehicles also retire here in the Cavalry Tank Museum. Construction of the Cavalry Tank Museum commenced in February 1993 and was inaugurated by the late General B.C. Joshi, a tankman himself. The museum presently has 40 armoured fighting vehicles of various kinds. Before we take you round the Cavalry Tank Museum, let's have a quick glance at the history of the cavalry. War has been constant in human affairs since the earliest societies of which there is record. It is said that the Assyrians were the first to use cavalry. Cavalry began to play a greater part when Alexander forged the Companions' cavalry into an irresistible army. During the Roman era, cavalry took an important place in the line of battle. However, heavy cavalry riding with the aid of stirrups was brought to the west by the Scythians and Sarmatians. During the Ottoman Empire, the mass of Turkish forces were horsemen called sthes. The Swedish cavalry consisted of cuirassiers armed with sword and pistol, and dragoons who were mounted musketeers. Cavalry was regarded by the ancient Hindus as somewhat superior to infantry, but inferior to chariots and elephants, the basic reason being the lack of good horses in India. Nevertheless, as recognition of the proper use of cavalry developed, so the standard gradually rose. During the 16th century, the Turco-Islamic invasions of India developed into a definite pattern. The Turks had energy and mobility being mounted on fast, tough Arabian horses. With the advent of firearms, mobility declined. Babur's army at Panipat had few horsemen, yet cavalry remained the elite troops. In the early 20th century, trench warfare stagnated the development of war tactics. Necessity is the mother of invention, and thus came the advent of the tank, which could move across trenches. The British Big Willie is said to be the mother of all tanks. Designed by William and W.G. Wilson, it was driven by a 105 horsepower Daimler tractor engine. The center of gravity was kept low by side-mounting the gun, weighed over 30 tons, and had a top speed of 4 miles per hour. However, the first use of tanks was preceded by the development of armored cars before 1912. Rolls-Royce produced the most successful of all the armoured cars built onto an existing commercial chassis in the early days of World War I. It could attain a maximum speed of 45 miles per hour. It was powered by a Rolls-Royce six-cylinder inline water-cooled petrol engine. A similar armoured car was used by General Dyer to lead his troops into Jallianwala Bagh on the infamous day of 13th April 1919. SDKFZ 232 armoured car was the most powerful and best-known model of the Germans, with the suffix 8 Rad as a distinguishing mark. By virtue of a relatively complex chassis layout, this vehicle was the most advanced cross-country wheeled vehicle of that time. The most unique feature of this vehicle was that it was driven by two drivers facing in opposite directions. The German army used these panzers extensively during World War II. After World War I, the Japanese acquired a number of tanks from Europe. However, during the late 1920s, Japan built its first tank. The diesel, rather than the petrol engine, was adopted. The Type 95 Ha-Go entered service in the Japanese Army in 1935 and remained in service until 1945. It saw action in China, Burma, and the Pacific Islands during the Second World War. In an effort to keep the temperatures low, the inside of the tank was provided with a layer of asbestos padding. Weighing just about 7.4 tons, the Ha-Go was powered by a Mitsubishi model six-cylinder air-cooled diesel engine. This tank was preceded by its earlier models Type 92 and Type 94. The model that followed the Type 95 was the Type 97 Chiha medium tank. This tank was a vast improvement on the earlier Japanese tanks and was probably the best Japanese tank of that period. The tank could attain speeds of 25 miles per hour. Its main armament consisted of a 57 mm gun. During this period, protection to the infantry was also being thought of. Accordingly, the idea of an infantry carrier was conceived from the tracked ammunition carrier vehicles of the 1920s. Thus, the Carden Lloyd was developed in 1939. 74,000 such vehicles were produced in the UK, Australia, Canada, New Zealand and the US, where these were known as the T-16. The T-16 saw service in all theatres during World War II. The hull consisted of two coffin-shaped compartments with the engine and the gearbox in between. Memories of this carrier are fading in the infantry now, but in its day it was one of the best-loved special vehicles. The Lynx Scout Car was the Canadian equivalent of the British Daimler Dingo, but was heavier and fitted with a more powerful Ford V-shaped 8-cylinder engine. This gave the Lynx a maximum road speed of 55 miles per hour. A 5-speed pre-selector forward-reverse transfer gearbox allowed the vehicle to be driven at speeds in either direction. The crew consisted of 2 men housed in an octagonal compartment. The A9 cruiser tank was designed for large maneuvers and deep strikes for the British Army of the 1930s. It was fitted with external steering brakes on the rear sprockets and had a slow-motion suspension. The A9 was the first British tank to have a power traverse for the turret. It had a 2-pounder gun and 1.303-inch Vickers machine gun. With a combined driving and fighting compartment, The cruiser had limited armor protection. The inherent mobility of the tanks and the mobility provided to the infantry by way of infantry carriers now made situations in the battlefield fluid. In order to strike with speed, it became essential to gain maximum information about the enemy's defenses and their mobile reserves. Thus, the need arose to develop a vehicle suitable for this role. The M3A1 was introduced into the U.S. Army as a reconnaissance and command vehicle in 1939. The distinctive front roller was designed to prevent the vehicle from digging its nose into ditches. The M3A1 marked the end of wheeled reconnaissance vehicles but served as a basis for half-track development. It could seat 8 men and was powered by a Hercules JXD 6-cylinder engine. The infantry tank Mark II was derived from the A7 experimental series of medium tanks. It was designed to perform a tactical role as the infantry support tank. These tanks were first issued to the 7th Royal Tank Regiment of the British Army in 1940. The tank was universally known as Matilda because, while moving, it resembled the way Matilda the comical duck waddled. The apertures along the hull side of the tanks were provided to expel the mud cakes from the tracks. Another notable feature was that the turret could be rotated by using hydraulic power. The Matilda was armed with a 2-pounder gun and a coaxial 7.92 mm Besa machine gun. As a gun tank, it last saw action in 1942, when it was commonly referred to as the Queen of the Battlefield. The Valentine Infantry Tank Mark III was the outcome of an urgent requirement during 1938 to supplement the Matilda program. It derived its name from the date when the design was submitted to the War Office on the 14th of February 1938, that is, St. Valentine's Day. Valentines gained a great reputation for reliability. Reportedly, some of the tanks motored over 3,000 miles on tracks following the 8th Army. The Valentine was armed with a 2-pounder gun, which was replaced by a 6-pounder gun. The Valentines first saw action in North Africa. The inherent disadvantage with tanks was their inability to cross ditches and other obstacles. To overcome this problem, some kind of a mobile bridge to accompany the tanks was required. The Valentine Bridge Layer was the first British bridge-laying tank of the Second World War. It carried a 30-foot scissors bridge adapted on a Valentine II chassis. The bridge was raised by means of hydraulic power. The Valentine Bridge Layer tank was powered with an AEC 6-cylinder diesel engine. As we know, the M3A1 marked the end of wheeled reconnaissance vehicles, but served as a basis for half-track development. The concept of the half-track was pioneered by Kegres in Russia before World War I. The M3 half-track entered into service with the U.S. Army in 1941. In tactical terms, the half-track was basically the equivalent of the British Bren carrier, but was larger and more powerful. It may be noted that the development of the half-track dates back to 1938, when a 4-wheeled scout car was fitted with a tracked rear bogie of the T9 half-truck. The M3A3 American light tank, known as Stuart Mark V in the British Army, entered service with the U.S. Army in 1941. The armament included a 37mm gun and 3.30-inch machine guns. It could attain road speeds of 36 miles per hour and was powered by a Continental radial air-cooled engine developing 250 brake horsepower. The 7th Cavalry was equipped with this tank during the Second World War. The turret was extended at the rear to house the wireless set. During the 1948 operations, the 7th Cavalry of the Indian Army earned laurels for itself by taking these tanks up to and beyond Zojila Pass at heights of 12,000 feet and in the Srinagar Valley against the Pakistani raiders. The M24, named after the US General Shafi, was developed to replace the Stuarts. This tank was a quantum increase in technology. It supported a 75 mm gun. The Shafi could attain road speeds of 34 miles per hour and was powered by 2 Cadillac 44T 24 V8 water-cooled petrol engines. The Shafi had a crew of 5 members. Pakistan used these tanks extensively against India in the 1965 war. The tank on display in the museum is one of the numerous captured by the valiant Indian soldiers. The Humber armoured car entered service with the British Army in 1941. It was used by many countries, including India. This car was armed with a 37 mm gun. The Humber was powered by a Roots 6-cylinder petrol engine, which gave the armoured car a maximum road speed of 45 miles per hour. Though the vehicle was phased out shortly after the end of World War II, one of the Indian Independent Armoured Squadrons used these in Nagaland from 1957 till the outbreak of the Bangladesh War in 1971. The landing vehicle Tract was intended primarily for use in flood relief operations and rescue of crashed aircrew. This armoured version, the LVT-A4, was mounted with the turret and howitzer of the M8 75 mm howitzer motor carriage. The LVTs were first used in Guadalcanal operations in August 1942 in a logistic role. It could attain road speeds of 17 miles per hour and waterborne speeds of 6 miles per hour. The Fox 1 armoured car, built in 1942, was the Canadian equivalent of the Humber Mark III. The drive was normally on the rear wheels, but four-wheel drive could be engaged. The turret was larger than that of the Humber and could accommodate a crew of 4 members. The armament consisted of one .303 and 1.50-inch machine gun. The M3 Grant medium tank was named after the famous U.S. General Ulysses Grant. It was the first tank from which indirect fire was possible. This tank mounted a 75 mm gun in a sponson on the right-hand side of the tank. It was powered by a Wright Continental air-cooled radial petrol engine. The Grant had its first impact during World War II in the Battle of Gazala. Above the hull superstructure was a turret with a 37 mm gun and a .30-inch machine gun. The M3 was finally declared obsolete in 1944. Field Marshal Montgomery's tactical headquarters of the 8th Army were based in this type of tank. The Churchill was a replacement for the Matilda. It was designed to function in the shelled area of the battle zone in support of infantry. It was powered by two 6-cylinder Bedford water-cooled petrol engines, developing 350 brake horsepower at 2,200 RPM. The tank had a trench crossing capability of 10 feet, as against 8 feet in most of the tanks. This tank could attain road speeds of 15.5 miles per hour. Armed with a 75mm gun, it was the first British tank to have an all-round vision for the commander in closed-down position. The Churchills were first employed during the Dieppe raid in August 1942. This tank was also used by Jordan, Russia and India. The US M8 light armored car was introduced into the US Army towards the end of 1943. It was known as Greyhound by the British. With its 6-wheel drive, the M8 was developed by the Ford Motor Company. Its main armament consisted of a 37mm gun and a coaxially mounted .30-inch Browning machine gun. It had a low silhouette and was a fast and remarkably quiet car. The M8 saw action in northeast Europe and Italy in 1944-45. The Sherman duplex drive was developed for the Normandy landings in 1944. The revolutionary duplex drive, designed by Nicholas Straussler in 1942-43, could make a 30-ton tank swim through water. The principle was that anything would float if given enough displacement. Initially tried out on the Valentine and the Tetrarch light tanks, the idea was to create a large collapsible boat around the tank, the bottom being the hull of the tank and the sides, bow and transoms being canvas on a tubular frame. Ordinary tanks fitted with canvas floating gear and propellers could swim in. The duplex drive could achieve speeds of 4 to 5 knots while afloat. Without the duplex drive, it is doubtful whether or not the infantry could have survived on the beach, let alone move inland decisively. However, this tank could not fire while afloat. The Sherman duplex drive was one of the variants of these basic Sherman tanks. Yet another variant of the Sherman was the flail tank. The Sherman Crab flail tank was developed by the British in 1944. The idea of flails was originated by Captain du Toit, a South African engineer, as a means of pulverizing the ground to detonate mines or remove them by force. Flails with small bob weights on ends of chains were mounted on the Sherman tank. The drum rotated at speed, and the chains detonated the mines in front of the vehicle. The speed during such an operation was 1 mile per hour. The tank was powered by a Ford petrol engine. Flail technology led to the evolution of trawl equipment in 1960. The British 79th Armoured Division used the flail tank to clear a path through minefields in Europe. The Sherman Beach Armoured Recovery Vehicle was one of the large number of indigenous special-purpose conversions carried out on the Sherman chassis by the British. The Sherman BARV was introduced into service for the Normandy landings. The Sherman BARV was a converted Sherman ARV Mark I with a welded superstructure bilge pump and an intake trunking for deep wading. Cavalry was a British heavy armoured car produced in 1944. It was armed with a 40mm gun. It was powered by the American Hercules 6-cylinder engine and could attain speeds of 41 miles per hour. Like the Lynx, it could be driven in forward or reverse directions. The Churchill ARV was produced in 1944 and used by the 79th Armoured Division during the Second World War. The ARV was one of the many variants which were produced using the chassis of the Churchill 1 or 2. Due to its specialist role, it saw service in many armoured engineer units. It was fitted with dismountable jibs, earth spade, and a 2-speed winch with a pull capacity of 25 tons. The Mark II was based on a Churchill 2 or 4 chassis, with the turret removed and replaced by a fixed box-like dummy turret and a dummy gun. The Churchill Bridge Layer was a turretless Churchill 3 or 4 with hydraulic equipment fitted in the fighting compartment. It could launch a 30-foot bridge horizontally. The bridge was made in 4 parts for ease of handling and could be controlled by the crew sitting inside. However, the bridge was carried and launched rigid. It could support vehicles up to 60 tons. This bridge layer remained in service in the British Army until the early 1960s, till it was replaced by the Centurion bridge layer. The Archer self-propelled anti-tank gun was an outcome of the need to provide mobility to the well-proven 17-pounder anti-tank British gun. It was powered by General Motors' 6-cylinder inline diesel engine. The Archer was the most successful British anti-tank gun of World War II. It could attain road speeds of 20 miles per hour. Based on a Valentine chassis, it weighed 16.25 tons. The Sexton self-propelled gun was a conversion of the Ram tank to mount the British 25-pounder field gun or howitzer. The Sexton was used since 1944. It served the British Army until the mid-1950s. The armament had an elevation of plus 40 degrees and a depression of 9 degrees. In India, this gun was the mainstay of the Indian Armoured Division self-propelled artillery for many years, till it was replaced by the Abbott SP gun.